In contracts management, we use any number of deliverables, especially in large projects. So to understand what are the different phases of the contracts management and what are the deliverables used in the different phases of the contracts management, starting from the pre-tendering, tendering, contracts management, claims management, and project portion. So let's start with pre-contract stage. Pre-contract stage itself has 10 important deliverables. The first one is tender clarification register. The tender clarification register is the register being maintained by either it might be a contractor or it might be the employer, or it might be between the contractor and the subcontractor to maintain what are the clarifications we had at the tender stage, because the RFQ received or the tender document received might not have all the informations. So the clarification between the employer and the contractor has to be maintained in a tender clarification register. Next is the pre-bid query log. The pre-bid query log is the employer has to maintain this for different contracts. So every contractor will have a different pre-bid query, and it has to be maintained in a separate pre-bid query log. And mostly the pre-bid query logs play an important role in the later during the claims period. Because what was the understanding of the pre-bid clarifications of the tender between the contractor and the employer. So based on that, many claims will arise upon in later stage. Bid evaluation report template. So they should have a bid evaluation report. It depends on the project requirements, and that evaluates the technical bid and commercial bid submitted by the contractors. Tender addendum or clarification template. Tender addendum is also the amendments to the tender or the additional requirements to the tender based on the pre-bid queries. And these tender addendums will also play an important role during the claims management phase. Risk allocation matrix, employer versus contractor. The scope and risks will be allocated between the employer and the contractor. So what is the scope of the contractor, and what is the scope of the employer, and what is the risk of the employer, and what is the risk of the contractor? Tender comparison sheet. It is usually the technical different is a different comparison sheet, and commercially it will be different comparison sheet to compare the contractors and say you who are going to be technically okay, and that those contractors will be filtered, and then they will be compared commercially, and usually the L1 gets the order, or it depends on the requirement of the employer. Next is the letter of intent template. This is very important because mostly before the award of the contract, the LOA is released. Letter of acceptance template. Letter of acceptance comes from the contractor that we accept for this letter of intent. Contract award recommendation form. So what are the checklists and the details required for the contract, and the contract final contract document will be, this will be combined both, that is a contract award recommendation form. This will be given from internally within the employer to given contract award for the particular contractor. The next is a contract document checklist. So what are the documents to be the part of the contract? It might be the work order, it might be the GCC, it will be the technical specifications, industrial standards, international standards. So everything will be part of this, and what is the schedule to be followed. The next phase comes the contract administration stage. Once after the award of the contract, it becomes the contract administration stage. So contract summary sheet. So what are the key classes like EOT, force measure, variations, payment milestones? These are the key classes. And contractual correspondence register, it starts It keeps a track on the letters between the employer and the contractor. What are the important communications between them? And in the correspondence, the most important correspondence of the notices. So notices are separately tagged or separately logged. The notice register or the notice log will have the notices on the EOTs, claims, variations, force measures, etc. Authority matrix. For example, for what are all the deliverables, it requires approval. What are the deliverables? It just needs information submission. So that has to be separately bifurcated to handle a large project where thousands of deliverables are being involved. The next is authority subcontractor approval form. If it is a nominated subcontractor type, the procedure is completely different. If it is an just the subcontractor or the vendor has to be taken from the list of approved vendor list or approved subcontractor list, the procedure is going to be different. And that will have a separate approval form. The approval has to be received from the employer before placing an order to the subcontractor. Contract amendment or variation agreement template. So this is very important. That's a separate procedure for the change management and the contractor. For example, if the employer has to send a written notice on the variations and amendments, if not, the contractor can also request for variations in writing if they are orally or verbally communicated at the site. Change order registers. Change order registers is usually or separately maintained to check what is the status of the change order, whether it has been submitted, whether it is open, whether it is closed, whether the commercial, technically accepted commercially, the discussion is going on, or whether it is also commercially accepted or it is commercially not accepted. So those change order register has to be maintained. Minutes of meeting templates. Minutes of meeting template is very useful because this is specifically maintained for contractual meetings. Project team has a large number of meetings and they have separate templates to follow. Contractual meetings are a bit sensitive and they have to maintain separate. And they play important role during arbitrations and legal proceedings at the end when there is dispute. Risk register. Risk register has to be maintained. Usually risk register are third party verified and third parties audit the risks of the contract. And they say what are the high risks, medium risks, and low risks, and what are the high and what are commercial effect of these risks and time impacts of these risks. Usually, time impacts are measured by schedule experts, and cost impacts are assessed by the commercial experts. Project key dates and milestone trackers. This is very important, even though project control has a high control over this area. The sending of contractual notices and keeping the employer alert or the vice versa, keeping the contractor alert when the delay is happening, it will directly come under the contract administration phase of the contracts department. So next 10 deliverables are from claims and change management. So notice of claim, there should be a template. Claim submission format, which is a detailed claim submission format. What are the characteristics, what are the important topics or titles should be inside the claim submission format. It will be very large. Time impact analysis template. It's not just a time impact analysis template. Usually, while running a project, the delay analysis acceptable is prospective delay analysis. It might be an IAP, it might be TAE, it might be TAE window. Whatever is possible, you can have. Disruption claim template. Most of the companies don't have these templates because disruption claim is not being understood by the industry very clearly because it is a loss of productivity claim. The industry is developing the knowledge of delay analysis only now. We are in 2026. I think it takes time for them to understand the disruption claims and acceleration claim. Very few top class organizations or big four organizations which have good exposure to disruption and acceleration claims have these templates, not everyone else. The next is the extension of time evolution sheet. It's the UOT evolution sheet. The UOT evolution sheet is nothing but what are excusable and what are not excusable, what are compensable and what are not compensable. So that is a very quick note. You may have a detailed analysis template, but this is a quick note to discuss with client or to discuss with the management is required. The variation order request template, which you also saw in the contract administration stage, and variation order evolution sheet. See, a variation order evolution sheet is that you might miss the entitlements under the variation. See, I have seen most variations will not have a time request. That is impossible, right? Every variation comes with the time. It might be fall on the critical path or it might not fall on the critical path. That's a different thing that you can find only in the delay analysis. But you need a time for doing this variation. So most contractors get satisfied with the cost. They don't ask for time. So those things has to be written. So whether we have calculated the material cost or whether we have calculated the labor cost, whether we have calculated the mobilization cost. So everything should be part of the evaluation sheet. The next is the cost breakdown sheet for, yeah, this is similar to the evaluation sheet needs an additional sheet to show the cost breakdown. The cost breakdown will be detailed. Like if it is a manpower, what are the manpower required? If it is the mobilization, what kind of mobilization is required? And if permit requirements, what are the permit requirements required and what is the cost? Claim settlement and negotiation record. So usually the claim settlement agreement has to be maintained because sometimes the contract might get amended or sometimes the contract might not get amended. So if there is an acceptance between the employer and contractor on a particular claim, you draft a claim settlement agreement and keep it as an attachment. In later stages, you can either amend the contract before the final closure of the bills, or you can use it as an amendment to the contract itself. 31 to 40, it is a payment and commercial management. It is not a separate phase. It is prolonged during the contract execution phase from the contract award to the contract closure. Like payment application template, that is IPC certificates templates, and payment certificate template in terms of engineer or employer. The payment application is from the contractor or subcontractor. Payment certification may be from the engineer or employer or also from the contractor for their contract with subcontractor. Retention release form. Usually, if the project is completed fully, you can request for the retention release form after the release of the PCC, provisional completion certificate, or you are completing the defect liability period. If you are going to use this retention as a performance guarantee. Advance payment recovery schedule. This schedule should be very clear. When the advance is given against the bank guarantee, it has to be clearly monitored to release the bank guarantee or to release the advance security from the employer. And the employer should be very cautious about the recovering the entire advance without double dipping or without paying extra. So final account settlement statement, it has a different kind of checklist which has to be followed. Cash flow forecast template. This is more important because when delays and disruption occurs, this cash flow forecast template will completely differ from what the cash flow template we had at the tender stage. So that has to be maintained. Subcontractor payment tracker. Yes, the contractor has to maintain a subcontractor payment tracker, whether what is the contract value and what is their payment. The payment is ad hoc or payment is against IPC. What is the payment is being recovered with the advance, and what is the retention value? Everything should be on the tracker. Back charge notices template. This is similar to the variation template. It has to be maintained because whenever there is a descoping or the work not done by the contractors, done by the employer, or the work not done by the subcontractors, done by the contractor, they both has to maintain their own subcontract payment tracker based on the contract name. And it should be attached with the back charge notice template also. So I am discussing about the back charge log, but there should be a template for the every notice for the back charges. And if you proceed after the acceptance of the back charges, that is well and good. But mostly it doesn't happen. The subcontractor will be silent and you will proceed. And at the end, there will be a dispute between both subcontractor and contractor saying that this value is very high, we cannot perform, we cannot share with you. Performance security or bank guarantee register, this is very, very underrated in more organizations, which has to be maintained, especially the employer. Because the securities are for the employer and subcontractors' payment performance security should be maintained by the contractor. This is more important, similar to a contract. Insurance registers and their expiry dates, and what are the coverages, and when it should be invoked, and what are their notices, it has to be maintained separately. So delay and risk management, this is a very niche area in the dispute management. So delay event registers, it is a separate log. Delay notification template, letter templates, mitigation plan template. See, mitigation plan template is a mandatory requirement under contracts. It's not just an optional requirement. Every contractor has to maintain a mitigation plan whenever the delay occurs, in spite of who is responsible for the delay. Because the execution control is on the contractor. In spite of the delay, even by the employer, the contractor has to maintain a mitigation plan to mitigate those delays. And recovery schedule format, if the baseline or the updated schedule slips due to delay, there should be a recovery schedule format which has to be followed by the contractor. Force measure notice template, concurrency delay analysis sheet. So this will be part of the delay analysis sheet. So it is like evaluating the EOT. You don't get cost for concurrent delays. You get cost only when there is a delay attributable to the employer. For concurrent delays, only extension of time will be provided because the risk is on the both sides. So risk is shared by both the parties. Time is shared by the both parties. Risk mitigation action tracker. Early warning notices. If you are using standard contracts like FIDIC or NEC, their time bar clauses are very strict and it has to be followed very strictly. Project closeout is the final area where the contract closeout checklist should be there. It should include even the as-built drawings, punch list closures, retention releases, defect liability period closes. Everything will be there in the contract closeout checklist. If dispute register, if the employer or the contractor is choosing to settle something via the legal or arbitration arena, and that disputes has to be tracked whether they also have a schedule to be followed. So that is the project closeout requirements. The arbitration practice record, if you are looking after multiple projects, then this has a very meaningful area that it has to be shared even with the management, what is happening at what point of time. So thanks for watching. At this time, we understand that there are 50 mandate requirements only for the contracts department. And if you want to have these study materials which has and sample templates, you can get in touch with our team to get these study material bundles to use in your department libraries. Thanks for watching. Take care.